In 2010, my father passed away, and some family and business took me to China. I'm firstborn American Chinese on my dad's side of the family, and my wife and I both moved there to Hong Kong and Beijing, where we lived for almost 5 years. We really enjoyed our time, but it was time to move on. And so we moved back to Lake Tahoe. Pretty much 90% of my work is spent in the mountains here. It's interesting, I moved here from China to pursue work, and being back here on Donner Summit, where I've climbed and knew a little bit about the history, whether it be the Donner Party or how the railroads were built by the Chinese here. And I'm like, oh, I'm not the first person to move here from China and try to make a living and a better life for myself.
In the years after the Civil War, the Transcontinental Railroad was nearing completion. As the railroad was making progress, there was one really formidable barrier, and that was the 7,000-foot summit of the Sierra Nevada mountains. To build a railroad across these mountains, the Central Pacific turned to an unlikely workforce, the Chinese.
The builders of the railroad realized they didn't have enough workers to do the thing. So they said, well, let's try the Chinese who are here mining or doing other things like this. And they started the crew right here in Auburn. They realized that the Chinese was such a great workforce that they decided to start recruiting Chinese to the point where you almost had up to, we don't know the exact numbers, but there could be 12 to 20,000 workers coming, and made up 80 to 90% of the Central Pacific Railroad's workforce.
The location chosen to cross these mountains was Donner Pass on the present-day Tahoe National Forest.
There are 3 sites within the boundaries of the Tahoe National Forest related to the construction of the Central Pacific Railroad. These sites are all that remain and exemplify the incredible effort that it took to blast the railroad through the Sierra Nevada mountains. China Wall was constructed by hand, block by block. It supported the original alignment of the Central Pacific Railroad. Summit Camp was a work camp. There were barracks, there were cookhouses, there were stables for horses. So it was definitely an area where there was a collection and a focus for work activities.
There were maybe 3,000 people at that camp that lived over there for over 2 years, building that tunnel and adjacent areas to the tunnel.
Construction of the Summit Tunnel was slow and laborious. Workers were only able to move 14 inches of rock a day. To blast through the granite, hand charges had to be set. Holes were drilled by hand using a drill and a sledgehammer. A charge was then set with black powder, and after the blast, a different crew would come in to remove the waste rock.
And it was through 2 of the worst snowstorms ever recorded in history. They were building this tunnel, which is 5 football fields long.
And I find that remarkable. That was 1866, 1867. Today it would be hard during summertime, to think about them doing that during the winter, I think is incredible.
This was the highest elevation tunnel ever built in the world at the time. They had to invent techniques to do this. And it was all done by hand. How could we do these things? It was really Chinese labor who changed America. It was an American project. It was designed, it was directed by Americans, built with American capital. But the hands, the feet, the labor, the sweat, the grunting, the pain, the death, the accomplishments were all Chinese-oriented.
The story of the Summit Tunnel itself, that term should be as compelling or evocative to us as when we hear the words, the Trail of Tears, or the Underground Railroad, or the Oregon Trail, or Route 66. We need to tell that as part of our, and that's the collective our folklore.
In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is complete. Leland Stanford drove a gold spike into the last rail at Promontory Summit, Utah, and the nation cheered. The Transcontinental Railroad revolutionized trade. It united East and West. It opened up international markets from Asia all the way to Europe, and eventually it revolutionized the American economy, as well as the way that we travel. Here in my time, we have the internet that allows us to send email across the world or across the street in real time. These are analogous events, and they both changed how we live.
There's a chapter in American history that belongs to the Chinese, and that a lot of it has to do with the construction of the Transcontinental and how the Transcontinental Railroad transformed this country.
Following the completion of the railroad, this huge surplus Chinese workforce was no longer welcome. Pent-up discrimination and the introduction of more onerous laws and unfortunately common values that espoused hatred and prejudice caused many Chinese to return to China. It caused others to go off and do subtle work, but the drumbeat of discrimination and hatred towards Chinese people kept increasing, and that culminated in 1882 with the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act.
So in 1882, Congress passed what might be called the first comprehensive immigration law, in which it excluded Chinese from immigrating to the United States, and then it prevented Chinese from becoming American citizens. It actually illustrates one of the tensions that occur throughout the American history from its beginning. But that tension has always been there. It's illustrated in the Chinese case that after we have built this railroad because we needed laborers, we bring in immigrants or people from another country. 14 years later, we then try to kick them all out.
Following the passage of the 1882 Act, the Chinese contribution to our country began to be forgotten or neglected, or maybe consciously excluded from our memory. By the early 20th century, not many people thought about this or even realized these things had happened. And in 1969, perhaps the biggest snub occurred at the centennial of the completion of the railroad.
A representative of the Historical Society was invited to be at that May 10th ceremony at Promontory. That individual was Phil Choi. So there was a lot of anticipation and a feeling that, aha, took 100 years, but we're finally going to get our just recognition. He gets to the ceremony, and then he's told, oh, we are sorry, Mr. Choi, but we have taken you off the program because the program just doesn't have enough time. But then he had to sit through the keynote speaker, who was then the Department of Transportation Secretary, John Volpe, who said, who else but Americans could drill 10 tunnels in mountains 30 feet deep in snow? Who else but Americans could chisel through miles of solid granite? The snub in 1969 inspired a number of people to try to make it right.
In 2011 and 2012, we got both the Senate and the House to agree to resolutions that talk about, we'll actually put it into the official record then, the congressional record, the history of Chinese migration here, their contributions to the country, and the reactions which the United States had to them.
Another part of the effort was that at the appropriate milestone or celebrations, that our stories, the Chinese story, was covered, would be voiced.
The group's consensus was we couldn't just drop it. You had to form something that continued to tell the story.
Things began to change as the country neared the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony in 2019. This time, a lot of groups, including the U.S. Forest Service, the 1882 Foundation, the National Park Service, the Chinese Historic Society, and many other groups and individuals would work tirelessly to make sure that this time the story was told completely and accurately.
The U.S. Forest Service is proud to help tell this story. Working with these organizations, the U.S. Forest Service has jointly hosted the Return to Gold Mountain tours. The Return to Gold Mountain tour provides an opportunity for descendants of the Chinese railroad workers, educators, and members of the public to visit important Chinese cultural heritage sites within the boundary of the Tahoe National Forest.
So we are on a train from Reno to Sacramento as part of a historic tour. Shortly, I will be visiting both my paternal and maternal ancestral villages in the Pearl River Delta region in southern China. And as part of my preparation work, I started to talk to a great uncle, and then he revealed to me that I actually have ancestors that worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. So in many ways, I feel like my homecoming has begun.
The Forest Service is looking at opportunities to outreach to the urban, suburban populations, people that we might not normally connect with out on National Forest System lands. One way that we did this is going to the San Francisco Chinese New Year Festival, having a booth, bringing Smokey Bear, talking to kids, parents, families, any member of the public, telling them about the Return to Gold Mountain tour, opportunities to sign up, giving them information about our Explore APA Heritage website, and giving them a booklet so they can visit the sites on their own if they can't make the tour.
And that's contributed to the public interest in the public lands, because it's something that you don't normally think about Chinese and the forest or the outside.
The Chinese historical sites within the boundaries of the Tahoe National Forest are so important. Many people don't realize they're there. Many people don't realize that this is a way that they can get to our National Forest System land and do something besides what we might think of as a traditional recreational opportunity. Hiking, camping, skiing, fishing, that type of thing. You can also go learn about our history, and it's our nation's living history.
On the Tahoe National Forest and many other sites, there's a renewed interest in the cultural history and the other cultural sites connected with these great events. So now you could really see the momentum as this story began to spread thanks to these people's efforts. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad is a huge story, but thanks to the contribution of the Chinese workers originally and the renewed enthusiasm of the people wanting to perpetuate their memory, the Chinese story became the dominant narrative connected with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad.
We could not have asked for better media coverage of the 150th and the story of the Chinese. Everybody picked up on the themes that we felt were important.
One could argue that the culmination of all of these efforts was the 150th anniversary celebration at Promontory Summit, Utah. This time, the current Secretary of Transportation had something different to say.
Today, at the 150th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony, marking the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, is a day to commemorate the contribution of railroads and the contribution and sacrifices of the railroad workers, including approximately 12,000 or more Chinese laborers, who risked everything to make the Transcontinental Railroad a reality. Building from the west, the Central Pacific Railroad hired 15,000 workers, of which 12,000 or more were Chinese immigrants. These workers of Chinese ancestry blasted and chiseled their way through the rugged Sierra Nevada mountains, using manual hammer drills, pickaxes, and explosive. They dug 15 tunnels through pure, hard granite. An estimated 500 to 1,000 Chinese workers lost their lives. But the Chinese workers persevered and played a key role in building one of the greatest infrastructure projects in the world.
I think we can be very happy that the story of the Chinese contribution to the Transcontinental Railroad was finally told in all its glory.
But you know what is really heartening during the 1882 project was, as unknown as it was to so many people, how many surprised it was how welcoming people said, tell me more. Tell me more about this story. I want to know more details. I want it in our textbooks. I want it in our public records and so forth. That is encouraging.
And we had an elected official or an appointed official, the Secretary of Transportation, speak on behalf of the country, acknowledging the contribution of Chinese workers. We couldn't have dreamt that in 1969.
That gives us hope for the creation or continuation of what it is that should be American, who are Americans, what that means, not just for my grandkids or to acknowledge the fact that my grandfather and great-grandfather, they were important in building this nation, but it's also for everyone else who is an American trying to become part of this American nation.
I'm so lucky that I get to even play here at all, and I hit the lottery that I've been able to make it a living working and playing in the places that I love. Those feelings and those opportunities wouldn't have been available if it wasn't for the people that came before me, like my father and the immigrants that originally came here from China as laborers to build our infrastructure, such as these railroads here in Donner Summit.
I think for me, I didn't really get a sense of the impact of my connection to this particular site until I walked through Summit Tunnel and then seeing that maybe this particular granite that I'm touching right now could be the same granite that my great-great-grandfather had touched.
The original immigrants, they created a legacy of coming here to the United States to pursue a better life. And I'm proud to be a part of that legacy.